Hi, everyone, and happy Monday. Welcome back to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we're very excited to be welcoming back Sammy Armenia, VP of Corporate Development at C21 Investments, and a very tuned-in voice in the world of U.S. cannabis investing. We're going to spend some time focusing in, of course, on what has been developing for C21, and then, of course, spend some time on the market in Nevada and in the wider landscape for U.S. cannabis. So if you're out there, one, thanks for joining, really appreciate it. But two, if you have any questions, comments, want to make sure we're opening that up. So if you have any, you're welcome to throw them in the chat and we'll try to get to them as we go along. With all that said, Sammy, thanks so much for making the time. Really appreciate it. How is your Monday starting off?
So far, so good. Thanks for having me, Mackenzie. Dealing with the crazy wildfire smoke that's happening everywhere in North America, it seems, thanks to us Canadians. If you haven't had a chance, look at the wildfire map zoomed out in North America. It is scary how many wildfires there are right now.
Oh, that's horrible. Oh, again, I hope you're staying safe. I know it's tough.
And it's just blowing everywhere, right? And I know I follow a few people in the States that were saying that it's pretty bad in certain parts of the States, and that's all just wind patterns, right?
It is, yeah. Well, again, I hope everyone out there is staying safe because it can be tricky. I know it doesn't seem like anything too great. We were talking about this earlier, but yeah, definitely thinking about people out there. But wanted to spend some time, of course, talking about the world of cannabis, talking about C21. Maybe a good place to start is sort of getting a temperature check on C21 itself and kind of what you guys have been working on lately, because there's been a lot.
Cool. Well, we had earnings last week. So we're kind of the first to go out with the June 30 numbers. For us, it's a Q1 since our year ends March 31st. For everybody else, obviously, it's going to be their Q2. I think they all start reporting this week sometime, I think Wednesday or Thursday. Mm-hmm. So, we went early, much like we did with our Q3 a couple quarters ago. And, we're really excited about where we are. 30% top line growth is kind of the highlight number. And that's been driven by same store sales growth out of all of our stores. Pretty much against the grain, I would say, of the industry at large. If you look at the state of Nevada, I follow kind of the headset data. There's other ways to look at it, but the headset data has Nevada as down 14% for that period year over year. And we're up 30. So we're kind of really, mitigating well, but also kind of going against the grain as far as how are we driving same-store sales growth through all our stores. Our retail model is exceptional. Mm-hmm. Our new store has grown. It just completed its first full year under our banner, and it grew over 120% from when we took over to June. So tremendous same-store sales growth. Even our flagship store, the Spark store, the big store in east of Reno, had its 10th anniversary on July 31st as the first licensed store in Nevada, first licensed medical dispensary in Nevada, July 31st, 2015. And, it grew 5% same-store sales growth quarter over quarter, which for a 10-year-old store is dramatic. And, if you think of, 5% doesn't sound that flashy, but you're talking about over 4,000 more customer transactions quarter over quarter just in that one store. So all cylinders are running well on our retail. That's not necessarily the case for the state or for most markets right now in the States. I think Nevada is really a story of split in half or two tails, the North and the South. And, we've talked about this before. The South in the Vegas, Clark County area has been really devastated by the free-for-all with intoxicating hemp. And if you go to the Strip, you'll see it for yourselves. But there's no way for the state legal cannabis operators who are not allowed on the Strip, who are not allowed to service the hotels and the casinos to compete with, federally legal intoxicating hemp, which is just being sold everywhere on the Strip. So I think that's really what's happened to Nevada. You're looking at a 20 to 30% decline since the proliferation of intoxicating hemp. And I think it's just eaten the market share out of the southern end of the state. And they, the regulators seem to be aware of this. Obviously, that's a bigger conversation about what are states doing, Texas, and, what are the feds considering to do? We're seeing a lot of hints that the feds are tuned into this now and are trying to make some changes. Both, I almost think of it as a two-pronged approach. There's the illicit kind of cartel cannabis, and maybe that bleeds in to the intoxicating hemp world. But essentially, you have two worlds that state legal is competing with, right? And we have to compete with that with our hands tied behind our back on top of that, right? With all the extra costs of running state legal cannabis, with the extra taxes, 3 layers of taxes. If you think of a mature market like Nevada, you have a cultivation tax, an excise tax, and then 280E. We paid our full income tax provision this quarter, but it takes all of our profits. So, it's the same challenge most of the healthy cash flow positive companies are facing in this industry, right? As if you pay your taxes, that kind of is the brunt of your profitability. So 280E repeal, rescheduling would be tremendously beneficial for a company like us because we generate earnings before tax every quarter. And so you wouldn't be paying this egregious kind of overstatement of tax, right? Obviously there's the GTIs and the Crescos. There's a whole bunch of the bigger companies are in the same boat, right? Where you're generating this kind of profit and the government's taking virtually all of it. It's worth mentioning that not all companies face the same relief or the same benefit to 280E, both because, the vast majority, 99% of the companies in the industry have now refiled and are not paying their income tax. Most are just accruing it. But also, there's different cultivators are not as impacted by 280E as retail. So there's different segments of the cannabis sphere that are impacted more or less by 280E. So, for investors, it's worth paying attention to. If we are all kind of hoping, betting, praying on rescheduling here, it's going to impact the companies, in the ETF. It's going to impact them. There's a varying scale of impact, basically. So,
yeah, no, I think very well said. And again, I think just in Nevada and within the cannabis space in general, a great trend to be able to kind of buck and be able to really put up some strong positive numbers, which is great. In terms of, announcing first and kind of, being kind of leaders and announcing and putting out numbers and earnings, is that basically come from the ability to be able to back it up with those strong numbers, with that positive story in cannabis when cannabis has been so tough for so long for investors?
There's an element of that for sure. We're proud of where we are. There's a lot of distress in this space. We've seen some very unfortunate news recently from some of the operators in the space. And, we're not feeling that. So we're kind of proud to kind of step out and say, look, this isn't everybody. There are healthy companies right now. It's a bit that we've changed some of how we do our accounting, and we have a really strong team now, and we're really on top of, getting our numbers prepared every month. And so we're just ready within 4 weeks of our quarter ends, which is, traditionally what you see in the broader markets. We have a bunch of companies in this space that have always been able to kind of lead on that front, and we want to join them. So it's definitely part of we grew 6% quarter over quarter, and that's now, I think, 5 straight quarters that we've had this quarter over quarter growth. That's just been tremendous. It's 30% year over year now. This was the first quarter we were able to state a year over year comp because we had changed our year end last year from January 31st to March 31st. We didn't have any comparables year over year until now. So you can kind of look at our numbers now and at least have a sense of, what we've done over a year. But yeah, 6% growth in this market right now is quarter over quarter is a lot. I think our transaction growth is 45% year over year. It's dramatic. It's gone from, 125,000-ish a quarter to 185-ish. So it's a huge jump. And all 3 of our stores are seeing that. So it's not just you did M&A a year ago, and so you have a new store. I mean, yes, we had the M&A growth, but all of that now is being generated is organic same store sales growth out of just the machine and the kind of retail model that we run, which is, high volume. Everybody's product is on our shelves, price leader, great locations. We have drive-through at our flagship store. We just have a really solid model that, our customers really, love the experience and they keep coming back. So
Yeah, no, I think stores that people want to return to, obviously that's the story. Oh, good.
Sorry, Mackenzie. Moving forward, we just want to do more of the same right now. Nevada is probably going to be a consolidated market like most, and we want to be one of the consolidators. So like we did last year with the Deep Root store, we're, actively pursuing, expanding the retail. We have that large grow facility. It's 104,000 square feet. We've only built 40% of it, so we can scale our, fully vertical model as needed as we add stores. We're always, if you know our story, you know that we're very, I would say, conservative in the sense that we're always very protective of our shareholder, of our cap table. We haven't issued a share. Sonny took over in July 2019. We're talking about 6 years ago now, and he's never issued a share. And, now we have buybacks. We've done almost 2.3 million shares that we bought back in 2025, both through one large chunk and through an NCIB. So we are actively trying to drive value every which way we can for our shareholders, trying to kind of be an outlier that way, a little bit of a differentiated model. We also, the legacy story is that we paid off that 30 million senior debt, which nobody else in public cannabis has done. We're also paying off that store. So we had done a small debenture. I think it was 2.9 million, 3 million. We used some free cash to pay for the rest of that store, but we've already paid half of that off, principal repayment every month. And so we're not just servicing debt, like, basically the majority of the industry, that's what you see. Because of the high cost of capital, most can just service debt. And so that's why I like to point to kind of earnings before tax. If we want to think that 280E maybe is something that's going to get solved, that doesn't necessarily solve all the problems in the industry. Because if your interest costs, your carry costs are such that it's, taking all of your profit or making you burn cash, like most in this industry, you're still not going to be, in a healthy place. It'll be healthier, obviously, if 280 is not being accruing on your balance sheet, but a lot of companies still have to solve for the carrying costs of, oversized, over-leveraged balance sheets, right? So one of the benefits of 280 and rescheduling would be that interest would now be an expense, a normal business expense, normal operating expense that will really help a lot of companies. And so, yeah, we're feeling good. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to, be overconfident because, as you know, curveballs come in this industry seemingly daily. So we just try to stay on top of, the operations that we have and the opportunities that are out there. And we're excited about what's coming, both for C21 and for the industry at large.
No, I think that's fantastically said. I do think, it's important to keep beating the drum in terms of where you're able to find that kind of standout performance and find that growth and find those numbers, just because I think, in the industry, there's a range of different approaches, but it's important to be able to show that, you can get it done and you can, put up some solid numbers and a solid story in the space, even under the current environment, even though we hope for a better environment. Hopefully soon. We'll have to wait and see. But I think it's important to be able to share that, which is great.
We're not alone. There are obviously other companies that are outperforming, their markets and things like that. And so it's upon all of us to kind of, do the work and see where companies are healthy, where the balance sheets are solved, who has the opportunity moving forward, when that opportunity comes for broader reform, who's best positioned for it, who benefits the most from a rescheduling, who benefits the most from access to capital. I mean, there are so many companies that are starved right now and don't have that ability to solve for the kind of pending maturities that are coming in the space, right? The 26 kind of debt cliff. Obviously, if we get rescheduling and that opens up kind of a snowball effect to, potentially something like safe banking or access to capital, access to uplisting, things like this, as they come, all of those will all start to come down for all the companies. And really, it's almost like you're betting on how much time, how much runway do companies have to get from here to there, right? And unfortunately, we've already seen a handful this year that haven't been able to make it and have already kind of fallen off the board, or they're in the process of receivership, things like that. And it's unfortunate. There's a lot of good people in this industry that have worked hard under very trying kind of conditions, and I don't wish that upon anybody for sure, that they don't find a way to kind of get there, because I think everybody deserves it for how hard this industry has been on the people, on the companies, on the investors. So let's hope we see change soon.
Fingers crossed. I know we'll talk about it in kind of some of the stories that have surfaced recently. I do wonder, just sort of with more attention, I know the beginning half of 2025 was much more quiet from an investor perspective, sort of digesting what would happen with the new administration, just sort of digesting even of the election and what happened in Florida and everything else. Now that we've seen some kind of return to interest and things like that, are you, I guess, I think you do a good job of sort of telling new investors sort of that differentiating element and why it's important to kind of understand what you own if you're in the world of cannabis. Are you sort of trying to tee up and be exactly ready, for those new investors, for larger investors, and being able to kind of explain, you're able to put up these great numbers, even though it has sort of a niche element there?
We're still very much a niche industry, right? Like, we have this platform, we have a couple of the other platforms to reach an audience, but broader audience is not tuned into this space at all. The broader media is not tuned into the space and doesn't allow for the platform for this, for us to reach that. And then obviously the exchanges that we're on limit a lot of the investor pool, right? And really the custody is the largest issue, right? I mean, when the prime brokerages are all gone and nobody wants to custody the shares of these companies, we find ourselves, with a very limited audience, unfortunately. I think about where cannabis was 5, 6, 7 years ago, even at these conferences versus now, right? We just had the one in June, right, in Chicago, and there's virtually no investors there, right? I mean, nobody's looking to invest in this space right now. If anything, we've seen the flip, which is that there's been a lot of exits in 2025, institutional exits. The few remaining large funds that were in the space have since exited. We've seen analysts kind of, pull back their coverage on the space. Canaccord. I mean, there's been one after another recently. I don't know who's left, to be honest with you, covering the space that isn't like a pay-to-play coverage platform. So in some sense, you can look at something like that as an opportunity, right? Because there's no interest. The community of investors is really small. And so if the doors open, will interest flood in? There's going to be a big opportunity for media coverage, for analyst coverage, for all of these things that we're missing right now. But as far as like teeing up how you get ready for that opportunity, having your IRPR kind of platform ready, I suppose, but really a spend right now is on deaf ears. Like, there's no audience to kind of go out there and talk to right now, other than our kind of little community that we already have, that's already very acutely aware. I mean, one great thing about our investor community is they're, for the most part, really educated on the space, really educated on the companies, on the income statements and balance sheets. Like, everybody seems to know what these companies are, and we don't have that many. I think 20 left. I think there's 20 left, and at varying states of health right now. So how you kind of capture that next wave is ultimately going to be when custody gets solved, when uplisting is afforded to the companies. That's when you're going to reach that broader audience, because the CSE and OTC just don't really capture that. There's a phenomenal graph that I had posted maybe a year ago on the NASDAQ and Dow, and it had crypto on it, it had TSX, and then it had kind of CSE, OTC, and it was just, daily volume. And, the CSE bar virtually didn't exist, right? There is no volume. So does that speak to access? Does that speak to just the lack of trust in the companies that are listed on an exchange like that? There's probably a bit of everything as far as why there's so little interest. And then, I don't want to go into the big conversations about mechanics, but The algos take advantage of illiquid exchanges, and that's not a cannabis story. That is an everything story. I've been recently pointing to the junior miners in Canada who have had a campaign for almost a decade now, trying to get regulatory change because these algos, although they're not necessarily breaking the rules, they're kind of tuned to take advantage of liquidity and kind of drive companies down in that. They're basically actively shorting, and then they passively buy back. And without that incremental buyer to support the bid on companies that are listed on these exchanges, it's a really uphill battle to fight computer programs essentially that are high frequency trading. And what we've even seen in this space over the last 3-4 years is we have hope of reform and we get these rallies, and as that subsides, we all seem to drift back together regardless of what the fundamental story is of any of these companies. We can look at us, right? We've expanded. We have 30% growth. We have paid off debt. We have buybacks, and we are absolutely no higher than we were before any of those things. So fundamentally, nothing seems to get priced in, right? And a little bit of that, at least, is that you face this uphill battle in exchanges and in a lack of custody to have kind of incremental interest in the space. So that the bid is supported against these kind of programs. And
yeah, I definitely think it's a huge benefit, obviously, to have better liquidity, to have easier access on the listing. So hopefully we do see that in general. And I think, when and if we see changes, if they're coming from Trump or something like that, I imagine that does get a lot of wider coverage, which hopefully would kind of introduce people into cannabis, from a wider perspective, a wider net, a wider, set of investors ultimately.
The setup is there for exactly that, right? For interest in a new emerging kind of industry that's kind of quote unquote America first, right? These are American companies employing hundreds of thousands of Americans in legal jobs, and great opportunity, right? And also, if we want to think of cannabis as both vice and health, right? It's a much healthier, much safer industry than two of the more legacy vice industries like alcohol and tobacco, who are basically having their pockets picked right now by the interest in cannabis as a replacement, right? Especially in the younger generations. But even with the older generations, we're seeing a dramatic increase in that kind of migration over from those more traditional vices to potentially a healthier vice. And obviously, we all know that with rescheduling, the ability to research hopefully the benefits of this plant, right, is going to increase dramatically. And we can start to see potentially a normalization, both with acceptance, it's less taboo because we see more evidence that, that this is at the very least not as harmful, but hopefully even more so, has the health benefits that a lot of us in this industry kind of continue to try to advance. But we'll see. I mean, it's nobody can predict the timing on any of these things. I think we all know that Trump has probably the keys to where this is going to go. That seems to be at least how everything that the new administration is moving forward, how it seems to evolve, right? Is that Trump wants something and he's going to get it. And I think we've seen enough signs, even last week with the interview with the former DEA administrator. He very much echoed that, right? That if Trump wants this, he's gonna do the work and make the change. So,
yep. Again, I think we've been kind of knocking at the door for a long time in terms of a lot of the positive benefits, a lot of the trends that are supporting more use and adoption, whether it's the younger generation, older generation, or somewhere in between. I think we've seen a lot of those things have been building for a long time, and I think that's why we've seen when there's any hint of something changing or something being recognized like that. The stocks will move. Again, they need to find that actual foothold to kind of keep that momentum up. But it does seem like recently, at least, Trump has, and the administration has really kind of taken cannabis through the lens of the things that are important to the administration, whether that's sort of shutting down cartel elements or, trying to find safety and removing the opioid element. What do you make of sort of the, I feel like, intensifying conversation from people close to the administration recently, even over the summer, in terms of what you think that means.
I'm encouraged. I don't think it's a coincidence, whether it's kind of MAGA influencers, people close to the administration are all kind of singing a song in harmony, it seems, right? That they believe in rescheduling, that they are very much about tackling the illicit and cartel markets because they seem very linked to the opioid crisis, fentanyl crisis, and also, as a lot of us know in this industry, there's a lot of bleeding over into the intoxicating hemp, which is not regulated. It's not tested. And you see these, RFK was just talking about this, I think, over the weekend or on Friday, 7-OH, like these synthetics that are being found in gas stations and smoke shops. None of it's safe. And it's certainly not tested and regulated. And it's, not generating revenue for the states and for the government. So I see them all kind of rowing in the same direction as far as this is becoming, it's probably not the most pressing issue for this administration, but it certainly seems to have jumped up, the ladder as far as where it is on their attention. And so far, the DEA administrator to go on and do an interview and give us at least some sense of what they're focused on, I think brings a lot of clarity. They're not worried about state legal cannabis companies. He said as much, right? They're not focused on that. They're focused on the dangerous illicit market and the cartels kind of running these operations throughout the states. And, how much that's the antithesis of what this administration stands for, with its America First platform. And I think they're going to throw everything they have at it to shut it down. Because ultimately, we've talked about this before, right? It's one thing to acknowledge what the problem is. It's another thing to enforce. And, we're seeing busts daily at these illicit grows. There was a huge one in LA the other day. And I think that's only going to intensify moving forward. And in some ways, it logically makes sense to kind of deal with the illicit and the intoxicating hemp. We know that right now there's varying bills in the House and the Senate on whether or not to close the loophole. There's a junior senator out of Kentucky that's kind of blocking it. The senior senator out of Kentucky is giving him a lashing as to, so there's obviously a lot of politics in all of this. And, you're always concerned by which lobby has the most powerful influence when it comes to Congress acting in the best interest of the Americans. So that's all going to, play out as it takes. I think we're seeing a lot more signs that this is an issue that isn't just being dangled as a carrot for, the midterms. We're nowhere near the midterms yet. And yet this seems to be something that's being talked about regularly now. And we're seeing evidence that they're enforcing now. So I think it matters to them. I think there's enough people close to the president that cannabis matters to, that I think, it's having a positive impact on his thought process and how to play out. So we'll see.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of conversation, two-way conversation, it seems like, between the administration and the industry. So hopefully that helps in terms of the education and understanding how urgent it is basically to make these changes, whether that's from a health perspective, sort of an economic and American business perspective, or whatever, ultimately. Do you pay any credence? I feel like there has been more conversation around what Trump would do, whether it's sort of that rescheduling and continuing on the path of rescheduling, or even moving to, descheduling entirely. Do you think that's ultimately just noise? How much does that matter? Any importance there? Okay, perfect. I feel like there's always.
Obviously none of us know. Maybe there is really that conversation happening in the background, but at this point, there's no real sources to suggest that they've changed their mind on how they're going to approach this. We'll see.
Either way, win, right?
Jumping to scheduling would be great, sure. But we've been in an industry waiting for incremental progress. And it seems like every time we hope that there's going to be an incremental step, we've seen, at least through the Democrats in their administration, right, that they wanted to take these big swings, or at least appeared to want to. And then nothing moved. There was no progress whatsoever. So I think, at least from an industry standpoint, I think we all are hoping for an incremental win here, because I think that's how you open up the next, the following move and the following move after that, as far as, progress for an industry. Trying to get everything solved in the first, bite seems a bit ambitious. So
that's fair. I think it is ultimately incremental, but again, an important change, and that would be kind of a big turning signal from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So hopefully we'll see that.
huge.
For sure. All right, let me see. I'm getting some questions which are in. Let me see if I can pull those out really quickly. Interesting question from Sonic Yogi, which is kind of on the conversation of hemp. Do you have any thoughts if hemp beverages might also be opening up wider adoption and ultimately more downstream dispensary traffic in addition to the obvious challenges, or is it hard to tell?
Certainly our markets right now where the hemp drink adoption is high. I think of places like Minnesota. We in the north of Nevada don't see that adoption necessarily as active. Maybe it's because our customer base is just more of a flower and vape, customer base, the regular user. That doesn't mean it's not happening. Really, it's going to be interesting on how ultimately, if they do find a solution for intoxicating hemp and regulate it in some way. It's their carve out for beverages. A lot of us think that that's how it ultimately plays out, where there is a carve out for beverages. But, if let's just take the flip of that and complete ban, THC ban on hemp, what happens to all the beverage companies that have launched? We have some state legal cannabis companies that have launched hemp beverages. Like, I know a lot of companies have just dipped their toe and they went capital light to start because there's so much uncertainty on the farm bill and kind of how this is ultimately going to play out. And I probably think that's the right approach, and the approach that we'll continue to see. I don't think anybody's going to make a big bet until it's clear permanently one way or the other what the outcome is going to be. But I completely understand the appeal to THC beverages. As someone who doesn't drink at all, it's a great vehicle. It's a great product especially in social settings, right? I mean, all of us are constantly, whether it's at concerts, at parties, different types of social events where, the beverage is still the way that people kind of, socialize, right? And for people that don't drink, and especially the younger generation, vast majority are not consuming alcohol, right? It's a fantastic replacement. There's no hangover, right? There's no, for those that are conscious about calories, right? You can get very low calorie kind of hemp beverages and THC beverages. So I completely understand the appeal to it. I think it's going to be a huge segment of the cannabis industry. I will step out, maybe be a contrarian a bit, and think that when that ultimately shakes out and there's some permanent kind of path for beverages, I think the large beverage companies are going to completely own that. I don't think that these state legal cannabis companies can compete. If you think of, the little hints that we've gotten from Big Alcohol in their earnings calls this year about how aware they are that cannabis is kind of eating their market, they all have to pivot. We know that Big Tobacco has to pivot. I think there's the mega cap kind of alcohol and tobacco companies have the distribution. They have the longstanding kind of ability to consolidate anything that they want. So we don't have the capital in kind of this small state legal industry to kind of compete with that. So if they want in, I think they'll come in and they will take it all.
Interesting. If they did do that, though, ultimately, do you think that would be a benefit and boon for the larger cannabis space? Because I think you have more access to people who will try something cannabis related and then maybe say, oh, I will try a vape or try. Okay.
Yeah. The more normalization, the better, right? Okay. For the industry, however it plays out. And, how would it really impact any of the existing state legal operators if you think of Coke and Pepsi, right? Like if you think of the cola wars, right? There were a lot of cola companies 30, 40 years ago, and now there's two, right? That's how industries play out. And this will be no different. you also have, if you think of the beer industry, you have all the large beer, all the large brewers, but then you do have craft brewers, right, that do, good business, and cannabis probably will mirror that. I think, at least on the flower side, there's such a craft kind of analogy between craft cannabis and craft beer. So I think we will see a lot of smaller companies exist. But these conversations jump so many steps, right? Because where we are as a Schedule 1 drug that has, no federal reform whatsoever, to this kind of normalized, possibly descheduled world, competing with alcohol and tobacco in a descheduled environment, seems so many steps away from where we are right now.
That is true. I will say it does feel like we're definitely talking in the hypothetical, but it does feel like that is, I hope, where the path, where a lot of the data, what we've seen in terms of, stats and different stories, where things seem to be headed. But you're right. It is still.
Cannabis isn't going back in the bottle, right?
Yeah.
Pun intended or whatever. Like, this industry has so much momentum. It has so much interest. And despite all the challenges and hurdles it faces, it continues to grow. It continues to thrive. Unfortunately for investors, we've lost so much market share to both illicit and to a loophole, in the Farm Bill. All of this is going to get sorted. I don't see any world where this, let's call it, trio of state legal cannabis, intoxicating hemp, and illicit/cartel cannabis exists moving forward. A decade. Like, there are too many problems with it. They're not capturing the revenue off of both intoxicating hemp and illicit. There are all sorts of safety and health issues with not having a regulated, tested product. And I think the current administration is very in tune with that.
Yeah.
And very different than the previous administration as far as being in tune with that.
Yes, very well said. And I think in terms of being willing to take, pretty strong action, I think we've seen already that kind of come into play, which is interesting. All right, next question. Also, hey, Skip, great to see you. Next question is, how large will, this is also kind of talking in the hypothetical, how long will margins be in the future when generally people want lower prices? Will there be a McDonald's in the industry selling low price, low margin, but selling, high quality quantity?
No, the last time you've been to McDonald's, but I took my kids there, and they're growing fast. So the Happy Meal is not enough for them anymore.
Oh.
But I think my bill was like $35. And I'm like, what, when did this happen? 2 Happy Meals used to be $10. No, I'm half kidding. That just happened this weekend, and I was like, "What?"
It's true.
But no, obviously, inflationary pressures are driving most business, and cannabis has seen the deflationary. We've seen the opposite effect over the last couple of years, right? Where race to the bottom in prices. Probably a very normal phenomenon in any emerging industry, right? Is finding that kind of price demand equilibrium, I should say. And, if we look at mature markets that have stabilized, there's probably evidence that, let's call it a $20 eighth or something like that, may be a normalized market. Can that drop to 15 or 10? A lot of people argue that the tax savings of 280E will get passed right to the consumer, and potentially quickly. So, you could see prices drop 25% pretty quickly in a rescheduled world. The supply demand in most of the mature markets is somewhere in the $800 to $1,000 pounds. Ultimately, what's the cost of an indoor pound to grow? Will we ever get to a normalized industry where all the cannabis is outdoor, with cheap inputs, where the cost to grow a pound is so low that it drives the price down? I don't know, because there's definitely a difference between the product quality, in outdoor and indoor, and the stability and the repeatability of an indoor grow. So we will see, but all of these questions make it so difficult to price the future of cannabis, and frankly, to value the companies. When you say, I had reposted something yesterday about price and value is ultimately, the clearest indicator of returns, right? If you buy something that is below its intrinsic value, you buy it at a good price, the likelihood of having a solid return, long term is very high. That being said, what is the intrinsic value of the existing state legal cannabis companies? How do you price a future that is so uncertain where we don't know, unless you just take the assumption that all these companies are going to be federally legal at some point, that access to capital is going to be, like any normalized industry, that, we're going to not have all these egregious taxes, that we're going to have some sort of more moderate tax on this industry. And all of that gets passed down to the consumer at, a better price. But, if you think of alcohol didn't, a bottle of wine is still $20, $25 or whatever for a half decent bottle of wine. And, it's not like there's a race to the bottom for the price of beer, right? There is a floor on what the value is based on demand of any product. Whether we find that floor anytime soon in cannabis is going to be dependent on how federal reform rolls out. And, you could have a federal excise tax replace 280E. That's been floated before. It's not like this is a impossible scenario. And so then the price could potentially stay where it is right now. We don't know. We don't know how it's all going to play out. And, I struggle with this exercise regularly on how to value the companies that I'm invested in the space, and how to know what the future holds, right? Currently, we're in a very weird pocket of stagnant, there's been no stair-step growth in the last while. Hopefully Pennsylvania, Minnesota, hopefully we're going to see that resume, but right now it's a stagnant industry. What multiple do you give a stagnant industry that has so many challenges and where so many companies are distressed?
That's true. I will say, despite the challenges and the unknowns, I think, there have been teams that have been able to at least manage best they can in that environment and do well. So I imagine while we still have some unknowns ahead, I think trusting in a strong team can make a difference to be able to navigate that. We don't know what comes ahead. I think, again, we can point to a lot of positive trends in terms of adoption. Again, we're not fully there on the legal side, which I think makes a big difference. But again, I think that there can be hope for the future.
We're a small company, but if you think of us as a microcosm of potential, right? Double-digit growth, doing it without any dilution, doing it while paying off principal debt, buying back stock, like the ability to run, investor-friendly company is there. And we're an example of that. I understand it becomes more challenging when you have 10 markets that you have to navigate versus one. But in some ways, when you have a smaller revenue base, like a company like us, where just the pubco costs take up a more significant piece of, your revenue, and where the opportunity to grow is, potentially more limited if you only have one market. And yet, 30% year over year growth and all the things that we've been able to accomplish over the last couple of years, it's possible. Right. And we're not alone. There are other examples of companies that have been able to kind of buck the trend. But the ability to kind of build value, I think, is what every investor should be focused on. Look, there's going to be a trade in this, as there has been in every reform instance in this industry's history. If you think of California and Canada and all the, over the last 10, 12 years, all the examples of where these things become potentially hyper overvalued as interest floods into a very small space, right? If we were to, Tilray at $300 is always the thing that comes to mind every time I think of that as what was the best example of that, right? And then we just saw Tilray with a $2.2 billion write down or net loss last week. And, not all cannabis companies are built the same, is probably the best way to say it.
I think that is a good takeaway. All right. Well, that's fantastic. I know we are close on time, so I will say thanks to everyone who joined. Any final thoughts, Sammy, or where would you point everyone who wants to learn more? I know that a lot of people who are tuning in probably are engaged and understand, but for anyone who's new, where would you point them to learn more and get some of your insights?
I still think our X kind of small community is the best source of information, both on company level and on kind of reform conversations. I haven't found any place that has as a comprehensive kind of conversation ongoing as our community on X. And as far as the companies, they're all going to report in the next week or two. So we're going to kind of get a fresh lens on where everybody is. And it's probably static, from the conversations I've had, it's likely status quo for most companies right now, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just where the industry is right now with the lack of kind of incremental state reform and with the pause in federal reform, with the ALJ and all the steps that we've had paused over the last year or so. It really is dependent on what you're looking for. If you're looking to understand the value of the companies, it's a very different conversation and amount of work and research than if you're looking at timing a trade around a catalyst, right? These are two very different things. And I'm not saying one way or the other is the right way to play this. We've all lost tremendous amount of, hopefully not everybody, but for the most part, everybody's lost in this industry to date. And so the last thing you want to do is start telling people to take bets on, uncertain propositions and futures. Is this a good time to invest in cannabis? To me, I would say it is. But again, are you investing to, scalp a quick trade on a reform hype? Or are you trying to find, good companies that are going to build value long term? And, I can't tell people what's the right way to invest their money. But again, it's a very different source of information if you're looking at one versus the other, right?
Yeah, no, 1,000%. And one, I think, much harder to do in the short term to time those things exactly right. It's been hard enough to time it kind of in the longer term slightly. But again, hopefully we see that come to be in the end ultimately. Also, really quickly, shout out to Jane as well. I know you're one of the people speaking on X and people who I think provides a lot of insight. So definitely appreciate all the work that you do there. All right. I think that just about wraps it up. Really appreciate you taking the time, Sammy. It's great to sit down and kind of chat. And I think highlighting this stuff is really important for people who are, trying to get a sense and a beat on, where the industry is, different companies that are doing well. So really appreciate you taking the time.
Tune into earnings week.
That sounds good. All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much again. Appreciate it and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.